So far we have learned what IoT means for trading societies in Melanesia, for the mobile network, for public transport, now for all of us and all the ways it's going to touch us. What does it mean for business? So to help us answer that, please welcome our final keynote this morning. Matt Furse is the Digital Transformation Specialist at Microsoft with an emphasis on the Internet of Things. Let's welcome Matt.
I'm here to talk about intent and empathy. And it's kind of a big deal because when we think about the Internet of Things, it's really about not necessarily what we're going to be doing with the technology from a connectivity perspective today, which is where we're actually learning. It's really about how do we actually turn it into a meaningful, either commercializable business or a business that can create a product that can affect people's lives, or what can it just do for people in general? And where are we missing? Like, why are there so many failures? Why is it so difficult to get going with this stuff? And a lot of the time we find that it's actually because some of this stuff is happening invisibly, which we've just heard about from numerous different speakers. It's not a visible revolution that we're starting to understand. It's actually, for the first time, a UI-less kind of environment. A lot of these components, a lot of the networks, a lot of the assets we're talking about are going to talk to each other without actually giving anybody any kind of visible input. They're going to operate at the speed of light. They're not necessarily going to involve a human at all until a human decision is required. And so that is going to have to bring about a significant change in the way that we think about business models, value chains, the way that we distribute data and how we share. It's such a big change that, in fact, the reason that all of the AI, VR, and all these types of technologies are coming together is because we're trying to find ways for machines to look at this data and to shadow us and to understand us and understand the real world. We're trying to effectively create a digital twin of everything around us and turn that into something that's meaningful. Now, it all sounds like it's near future, but we're nearly touching it. We're almost quite there. How do we actually get to that point? But it's kind of already here. So a lot of what I spend my time doing is working with customers and partners and other organizations across Australia and New Zealand. And I'm part of a worldwide team who work with lots of different customers. So I wanted to share some global case studies of who's doing this and where are we not seeing it, because it's just happened. And so above me are a bunch of screen grabs from YouTube videos, which are all accessible to the public. And they're from different companies. So all the way up for the top corner there's Ecolab. They're currently monitoring 1 million customer sites across the world and reducing their water consumption in manufacturing, processing, mining, all sorts of other industries that directly relate to us, by last year 140 billion gallons. So they're doing net water usage kind of analysis using this type of technology already to try and fix that problem. We're already looking at people like Purell. We see these hand sanitizers all over the place. I mean, 3 years ago, these guys ran a study using IoT-type technologies to work out why are people not washing their hands in hospitals, and how could we improve that sanitary position? So they started building connected sanitizers and putting them into different wards and trying to understand which hospitals were the worst offenders and how is that working for people. It's kind of an interesting kind of model. You think to yourself, well, why would I go from trying to connect a hand sanitizer when I can just sell hand sanitizer and hope that people use it? Why is it really interesting to go and understand how people are using it, or why they're using it, or how frequently they're using it? And it's kind of a realization that they actually wanted to understand more about the intent that we have. We're not very good with intent. We're actually pretty poor at intent. We chuck an app in the App Store and we go, done. I've offered the functionality to people, they will now use it. It doesn't really work like that though, does it? Because why, when I'm coming to this conference, didn't the app for everything IoT push itself onto my phone, knowing I'm coming here for 2 days, and then why didn't it disappear again? Why didn't it connect me to 400 people in the room instantaneously for the 2-day period, and then those that I had a meaningful connection with persist those connections with? Why do I have to go seek you? Why do you have to go seek me? Why do we have to go grab stuff? Because our intent is not truly understood by the modality that we're operating within. Now, if you truly have empathy with your customer in the business scenario, and I was really quite buoyed to hear New South Wales Transport talking about how they've tried to deeply understand their customer. If you really understand the empathy or the outcomes you're trying to drive for that customer, it doesn't necessarily mean today's business model even meets it. So we have to kind of turn that on its head and think, how do we go beyond our borders, beyond what we're doing? How do we share data with people that we traditionally have never shared data with? How do we ask them for data in ways that we've never thought about? And this stuff is actually already happening. It's happening all around us. Like, this is the interesting thing. The ones that are pioneering and the ones that are creating meaningful change in this space are starting to understand that their asset, the thing that they used to make or sell or operate, is part of a bigger system. It needs to be able to operate, if it's going to operate digitally and it can break its own borders and it can go reach out to other types of people, it now has an opportunity to go do things differently. One of those videos up there, someone mentioned Auckland Transport. You know, they've started thinking about the transport system as that kind of stateless system. It changes the way that you kind of think about transport, and it's great to see other transport authorities doing that globally and starting to make real inroads into that space. But the one that really speaks to me is the fact when the IoT starts to operate really well, and you truly understand your customer's intent, and you have true empathy with what they're going through, and you understand the criticality of the things that you could be creating for their environment, you can literally make a big difference in the world. I just want to share a video with you that talks about what Furse are doing.
Every living thing on the planet needs it, but 663 million people don't have access to it. That's roughly 1 in 10 people. 45 billion liters of water are lost around the world daily due to things like pipe leaks and bursts. Fixing those leaks would support almost 200 million people every day. These are the kinds of opportunities that we as a global community need to act on. And Furse is leading the way. Their pumps are responsible for powering much of the world's water infrastructure, from storage to treatment, transportation, and maintenance. And today, they're revolutionizing water systems in a way that will impact generations to come. Furse synthesizes data from intelligent sensors in real time and uses Microsoft technologies to allow smart pumps to predict, react, and prevent water issues. And those 45 billion liters of leaky water? Furse smart pumps can identify when and where water is leaking and automatically isolate faulty pipes. Furse is also using this technology to improve disaster relief, sanitation, and global energy consumption. They use predictive weather data pinpointing when and where major rainstorms will hit and strategically store water in safe locations, minimizing flooding and spread of disease. If health emergencies do arise, Furse technicians can use real-time monitoring and connected field services to quickly address pressing issues, improving water sanitation where it matters most. This is intelligent water management. This is smart technology in action. This is a Furse-inspired, Microsoft-empowered future, bringing greater sustainability and health to everyone.
Can't necessarily see it, but it makes a massive difference, especially to a whole bunch of islands that are just off the coast of the US that have been hit by 4 hurricanes, right? If there's a way to put smart water infrastructure in place that can protect water, make them more sustainable when they are hit by these kind of natural disasters, which seem to be more prevalent, then we could do some really interesting, meaningful, changing things. Not going to be done by a utilities company necessarily. It's only going to be done by the guys who thought, hang on, what is the real true outcome and intent of my asset? What is it really able to do? So how do people get going on this journey? Because it's tough, and I wanted to share some how a little bit and try and summarize kind of, it's tough to kind of think all the way through that. But biggest thing I spend my time doing is trying to work with customers on trying to simplify how they're thinking about the IoT. Don't get too caught up in the technology. Focus a lot more on what are those intents? Where are you spending time or being inefficient? And it's tough to be reflective of your business and say what we do today could actually be done better. I've got customers like Sodexo, a big facilities company, and they spent time thinking, well, why do we go back and forth to water treatment plants trying to take meter readings and figure stuff out when we could monitor it and have that done on remote kind of command and take millions of dollars out of cost and also avoid a bunch of downstream issues with water leakage. So they just start very simply. They think about that business now. They think about how could I make a change? And my biggest advice usually is have a go, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily feel that they're brave enough to have a go. They spend forever trying to build requirements documents or whatever. But how do we start to just connect the first thing that's related to that business scenario and start to analyze the data off it and remove the tyranny of distance and remove the distribution problem that we have around the data or whatever that's giving us? Now, can we turn that data into meaningful insights? And that can be iterative. It doesn't always work the first time. There's a lot of companies that we take a first run at with their data science and how they're interpreting the data, and it makes no sense. I can't understand why it's doing that. And that's because they haven't involved the right people. If you don't understand why an elevator is giving off a certain reading every Wednesday and every Friday, it's because you're not the maintenance facilities support team. You don't realize that building managers only walk around buildings every Wednesday and Friday and tell you your elevator's broken. Your consumers don't ring the problem in. So understanding and interpreting the context around data is really important, and working with everybody in that, and actually creating unnatural alliances quite a lot of the time is really important to try and get through that stuff. And then the biggest thing of all, you can find the world's best business case, massive, simple way to connect something, amazing insights very quickly. Is anyone going to change anything? Because if we make our entire world around protectivism and not changing stuff, and that's not the way we do it, and haven't involved the right people, haven't brought them on the journey, then nothing will change, and therefore the transformation won't occur, and it won't be able to make the change in the business or your end customers happen. And so it's really important to involve people from the beginning. It's really important to truly understand what difference are we making, to pin it to something that everybody can gravitate around. So where's this all going as well? Because I just wanted to share a bit of like where we're seeing the future heading, and it is kind of changing rapidly. Now, this was our worldview as a company, I guess. There was mobile being a modality. People were wandering around with mobile phones. We're doing stuff all the time now, not necessarily bounded by the previous paradigm of being locked to a specific network or in a specific building. And that stuff is kind of connected to a giant infrastructure that's kind of available over a bunch of commodity-ish networks. But that's changing a lot. Like that worldview is great, but like I said, the intent's not pushing itself to us. It's not dynamic enough. It's still a pull mechanism. So even though we're wandering around and it's amazing, we're still pulling stuff and we're still driving the intent ourselves all the time. Why don't we have context? Why do we not have something that follows us and enables that intent? And so this is where we're seeing the changes around the edges. So agents and bots that are able to interpret our world because it's now being captured digitally and operate on our behalf. And without the tyranny of a human in the way or a UI, they can operate at the speed of light. So stuff's happening much faster. You can be getting suggestions. It could be finding 10 minutes in your diary where you could be doing something. It could actually be trying to understand who are you near and who should you be connecting with that would be a better use of your time today. Or if you're in a flow, can it block everybody out? So you can just get on with what you were supposed to be doing. Those types of things where you have someone that actually helping you through life and doing all the things that you spend all your time manually driving is kind of a key thing we're starting to see in that space. Actually interfacing with that, not requiring a physical UI or changing UI modalities. So not starting on one device and walking around with one device, but actually starting on one thing, doing something else on another device, getting into your car using voice and then getting to work and kind of tapping something on the way through in the foyer. Could be quite interesting, scenarios where there's that modality changing. So how do we do multi-device scenarios? How do we do handoffs and rehydration and follow that stuff along? And then obviously once you've got all of that data and you've digitized the world, you can reapply all that to an infinite canvas. And so that's where we kind of see mixed reality starting to come in. So where people can actually start to apply all of that learning, whatever we have, back into the real world. So we can do things that we've never thought possible. And it changes the paradigm. It changes it to becoming what we like to call the intelligent cloud and the intelligent edge. It's altered the way we think about how we're doing work. And so the edge is becoming ultimately a very important place to start thinking about this. I mean, yes, there's some technologies that are enabling that. We talk about AI, we talk about multi-device handoff and that kind of stuff. And that will become more important over time. But it's also just some basic technologies, like how do we stop managing all these things like they're precious like devices, and how do we just start pushing new functionality all the time to the edge? How do we enable those devices to hand off to each other using a bunch of standards? How do they never pass data to the cloud? How do they just do stuff and that's it? So how do we make sure the AI and the cognitive stuff is happening wherever it's supposed to happen and not necessarily bouncing around a network all the time trying to find a home to get processed? Because data has massive gravity. And if we're creating so much of it and we're digitizing the real world around us, the compute's got to go to the data. You can't necessarily move the data around all the time. And that's kind of where we see the kind of future opportunities for this type of technology to apply to businesses, because there's so much they could be doing in this space that we're not already. Does anyone know what that number is? It's intentionally vague, so you wouldn't shout. It's the amount of data that IDC reckon will be processed and trashed on the edge by 2019, 2 years. Now, there are many different analysts that think similar, but Gartner talk about how much is not going to be stored. So if we're treating data as highly valuable at the edge and disposable everywhere else, why are we doing that? Like, what are the benefits really of trying to do this kind of stuff and deal with kind of edge computing? Well, first and foremost, this is really about trying to lower the cost for people, because if you have to keep putting a high value network in all the time just to get a tiny bit of information off something, or if you have to deal with massive quantities of data and you have to try and pull that in just to process it to send a simple evaluated signal back, that's kind of expensive. It starts to get expensive. So we need to lower the bar of what that takes and try and spread the compute out where it makes sense. How do we address the problem with, I don't want necessarily my live heart rate readings always going to someone, don't know who that is, to be told, how my health's going. I'd rather just send them a summary that's been done locally that I can see it and choose to cut it off if I want to. That's kind of the compliance problem, security problem. So if we can actually distribute that problem, create breakpoints, makes it a bit easier for businesses to take it up. Response times, this is a key one because we've got companies already today using this for health critical, machinery critical requirements because you can't necessarily send all of your data back to be processed and then turn a machine off. It doesn't work like that. So some of this stuff has to happen within single-digit milliseconds to prevent failure. How do we make sure it's always dependable regardless of what's happening? Agriculture being a key one. There's on and off networks all over the world. So how do we make sure we're able to start thinking about that? And how do we interoperate between the old world, where stuff already has sensors, but it just has absolutely no chance of talking to intelligent systems? How do we actually bridge that divide? And how do we ensure interoperability and security of those existing assets? So there's a lot of thinking going into this, but these are the benefits. And I mean, we're seeing this already. There's companies like Samvink Coromont who build like CNC machines effectively for factories. And they're monitoring them globally, honing their algorithms for each customer, and then pushing down the safety-related, the latency-sensitive stuff back down to the machine. So instead of lunching itself if it starts going over temperature, the machine can actually do an emergency halt within a few single-digit milliseconds because it's running the cloud technology at the edge. Notice how I said it's not running Windows or anything like that. It's not a monolithic stack of software that sits there. We're actually talking about running cloud componentry and pushing it down to the edge all the time. So they can continue to keep these things up to date and continue to make a difference in honing their customer experience and changing that edge fabric all the time. We're trying to make that easy as possible. It's quite a big difference to think about like that. So when you go forward into the future in this space, those benefits and what other companies are doing with it, a lot of these brands I'm talking about are large tier 1 manufacturers or large government entities or whatever. So how do we get going with startups? And I was hoping not to necessarily give the impression this is only accessible by the biggest development teams. A lot of the work that they've done actually informs us that we then open source the code. So we're trying to encourage startups to come forward, jump on and start using our platform, use that technology, and get to the same endpoint these guys are. But these guys have kind of already done the pioneering work from the hard engineering perspective. So then any startups, anyone who wants to make a difference can actually start to step forward because we recognize a lot of innovation is happening at the grassroots level. It's just trying to get it through to organizations and trying to make sure that we think about their intent deeply. We hook it to their businesses. We try and make a meaningful change in the world. And we try and make sure that this is happening in a cyclic manner. So everybody kind of gets used to honing that kind of muscle, if you will, inside their entities. Just to share one more, this is a holographic, it's kind of a nice IoT and hologram kind of futuristic case study, but it's happening today. So maintenance engineers for ThyssenKrupp elevators. You may not even notice who ThyssenKrupp are or where they operate, but some of the airport ramps at Sydney Airport, some of the sky bridges, elevators, escalators, anything that moves people around, these guys are involved in engineering. So they're kind of an invisible asset. We just use it every day and assume it works. These guys spent time basically working out why are our field force taking forever to maintain these things? Like why, what is our impact to our customers, which is effectively the more of us that move into high-rise buildings, and Sydney hasn't built many high-rise buildings in the last few years, has it? I think, this thing becomes a critical piece of infrastructure because we all hate being stuck at the bottom waiting for the elevator. We can't get to our meetings. We can't get into the office. So these guys started to actually remotely monitor those things and change the way that they maintain them. So now their maintenance, using all of that data they've got collected, they're able to centralize some of their expertise. And now they've switched to using some of the holographic technology to overlay the job, if you will, back onto the elevator so the guy's hands-free. Goes from 2 hours, is how long it traditionally took to maintain an elevator and replace parts and get it working again, to 20 minutes, times 20,000 field engineers, times 1 million elevators. So they're trying to move us faster, and they're trying to make sure we're always moving. We're not stuck at the bottom of our massive high-rises that keep getting built. They understood, they empathized with their customer, they truly understood what it means to be great at what they do, and they invested in trying to make sure that this type of technology is the future of where they're heading, and they're trying to improve their customer experience. So it's a huge change in the way that people think about how they're doing their business. Yeah, they do elevators, but they also are pretty much the vertical transport system for most of us. So with that said, I'd just like to thank you for your time and attention, and great to speak to some of you while I'm here.